I stood in the doorway of my new home, keys still warm in my palm from the handshake that had transferred everything I'd ever wanted into my possession. The metal teeth pressed against my skin, real and solid, and mine. After 7 years of saving, 3 years of searching, and 6 months of negotiation that nearly broke me, I was finally standing on the threshold of something that belonged to no one else. Fresh paint clung to the walls, that particular shade of warm white I'd chosen myself after studying samples for weeks. Polished hardwood floors gleamed beneath afternoon light streaming through windows I'd admired in listing photos 100 times before ever stepping inside. The smell of something new filled every corner, something I'd worked years to afford, sacrificed weekends and relationships and sleep to finally call my own. This wasn't inherited wealth or family money or luck. This was proof that discipline meant something, that patience paid off, that a kid from nothing could build something real. Family cars lined the curb outside, a parade of familiar vehicles I'd grown up watching pull into driveways that were never ours. My parents had driven 3 hours from the house they'd rented my entire childhood, the house where we'd learned that ownership was for other people, luckier people, people who understood money in ways we never would. My older brother, Derek, arrived in his expensive SUV with his wife, Melissa, and their 2 kids, the vehicle still carrying payments he complained about constantly despite the luxury it represented. Cousins filtered through the front door carrying casserole dishes. Aunts arrived with bottles of wine and loud opinions. Uncles claimed corners of the living room like they were already measuring for furniture. Laughter spilled from the kitchen into the driveway, and for one perfect moment, suspended between the afternoon light and the warmth of family voices, I believed I'd made it. I believed the struggle was over. I believed that owning something meant keeping it. My dad found me near the fireplace, his calloused hand landing heavy on my shoulder, the way it had when I'd graduated, when I'd gotten my first real job, when I'd done anything that surprised him into pride. "Proud of you," he said, and I felt 10 years old again, finally earning something that mattered, finally proving that his sacrifices hadn't been wasted on a son who dreamed too big. Then Karen Whitlock appeared. She materialized just inside the threshold like she'd been waiting for exactly this moment, timing her entrance for maximum impact. Uninvited, unannounced, a clipboard pressed against her chest like armor. The HOA president smiled at me, but the expression never reached her eyes. Too tight, too measured, too practiced over years of wielding small power in small ways. "Such a beautiful house," she said, scanning the living room with eyes that cataloged every detail, every flaw, every opportunity. The way she said family made my stomach tighten into a knot I couldn't explain. Before I could respond, before I could ask why the HOA president had crashed my private celebration, she slipped a thin envelope onto the entry table, already addressed to my house, already sealed, already waiting for this exact moment. Then she disappeared into the crowd, like smoke through a closing door. I watched her go, something cold settling into my chest, despite the warmth of the gathering around me. But it was my day, my house, my victory. I pushed the unease aside and rejoined the celebration, hugging relatives, accepting congratulations, pretending the envelope on the table didn't exist. It waited for me anyway. I opened it after the noise swallowed everyone's attention, after plates were filled and glasses were raised, and no one was watching the host slip away to read mysterious correspondence. The paper felt heavier than it should have, weighted with implications I didn't yet understand. HOA Special Occupancy Notice. Highlighted lines jumped from the page like warnings I should have heeded months ago. Property approved for multifamily occupancy under HOA Emergency Clause. Emergency. I read the word 3 times, then 4, trying to make it mean something else, trying to find the context that would make this routine. When I looked up, Karen stood across the room watching me read, wine glass balanced perfectly in her manicured hand. She'd been waiting, watching, gauging my reaction with the patience of someone who'd done this before. "Oh, don't worry," she said lightly, her voice carrying just far enough to reach me without alerting others. "It's just a formality, standard procedure for new homeowners with large families." Derek wandered over before I could respond, beer in hand, grinning like we were still kids splitting Halloween candy in our shared bedroom. "Guess it worked out," he laughed, gesturing vaguely at the house around us. "Plenty of space for all of us." I stared at him. "What do you mean, us?" My mother's voice floated from the kitchen, casual and devastating, destroying everything with 7 simple words. "Well, Karen said this was already approved." The celebration continued around me, but the air had changed. Something cold had entered the room and settled into my bones, something that felt like betrayal but wore the mask of family obligation. I excused myself and climbed the stairs, needing distance, needing clarity, needing to understand what was happening in my own home. I found Melissa in the guest bedroom, measuring tape stretched across the floor, notebook in hand, already planning furniture arrangements. "We'll take this one," she said without looking up. "It gets the best morning light. Kids can have the rooms upstairs. They'll need quiet space for homework." I laughed once, sharp and confused. "You're visiting for the weekend. The kids have school Monday." She finally looked at me, something flickering in her eyes that might have been pity or might have been contempt. "Karen said you knew. She said you agreed to this weeks ago." Karen's heels clicked on the hardwood behind me. She'd followed me upstairs, clipboard still clutched against her chest, smile still perfectly calibrated. "Oh no, this is their primary residence now. The HOA approved it this morning. Your brother's family qualified under our Family Assistance Initiative. It's really quite generous of you." Heat rushed to my ears. My hands trembled at my sides. "You approved what? I own this house. I bought it with my own money. There's no mortgage, no lien, no cosigner. This is mine." She smiled like a teacher correcting a child who'd failed to grasp basic arithmetic, patient and condescending, and absolutely certain of her authority. "Ownership doesn't override community use when family hardship is involved. Section 14.7 of the HOA bylaws, amended 18 months ago. I'm surprised your realtor didn't mention it." The room went quiet. Even the music from downstairs seemed to fade, the celebration becoming something distant and strange. Derek appeared in the doorway behind Karen, his beer now empty, his smile now wrong. He raised an invisible glass toward me. "To families sticking together," he said, "to finally having space." I demanded paperwork. Karen produced a thick packet from her clipboard with the efficiency of someone who'd rehearsed this moment in mirrors, who'd practiced these movements until they became routine. Signatures covered every page in handwriting I didn't recognize. Stamps authenticated margins with official seals. And buried on page 14, hidden among clauses about lawn maintenance and exterior paint colors, I found the provision that would haunt my sleep for weeks. Temporary transfer of occupancy rights in cases of familial housing need. Duration, 6 months minimum. Renewal, subject to HOA board vote. Owner objection, waived upon signature of purchase agreement addendum. Temporary, 6 months, renewable indefinitely. My vote didn't count. I'd waived it unknowingly at closing, buried in documents I'd signed too quickly, too eager to finally own something, too trusting of a system designed to exploit exactly that eagerness. My hands shook as I read the clause again, searching for loopholes, finding none. "You planned this. You knew I was buying this house. You prepared these documents before I even moved in." Karen didn't deny it. She simply nodded toward my family gathered in the living room below, visible through the hallway, laughing and eating and drinking like they'd already won. "So did they," she said. "We've been coordinating for months. Your brother approached us in January. Your parents provided financial documentation in March. The hardship application was approved in April. We've just been waiting for you to close." My mother stood at the base of the stairs, close enough to hear everything. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Karen leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper meant only for me, intimate and threatening. "If you resist, we fine you daily, $500 compounding weekly. Fight us in court, and we'll bury you in legal fees before you ever see a judge. Cooperate, and this stays friendly. Family helping family. Everyone wins." That night, I slept on the couch in my own home. My bed had been claimed for Derek's kids, the sheets already changed to ones I didn't recognize, their toys scattered across my bedroom floor like flags planted in conquered territory. My bathroom had been reorganized, my closet had been emptied into boxes stacked in the garage. My home had been colonized while I stood in the kitchen pretending to celebrate. At midnight, I heard heels clicking on the porch. Through the window, I watched Karen tape a notice to my front door, her movements precise and practiced. HOA Occupancy Compliance. Day 1. Resident Cooperation, Pending Evaluation. Inside, Derek sat at my kitchen table, laughing with Karen like they were old friends reuniting after years apart. Papers spread between them, numbers discussed in low voices, plans made in my house, about my house, without my input. He caught me watching from the doorway. "You'll get used to it," he said, not unkindly, like he genuinely believed he was helping. "Be grateful you have family who cares enough to do this. Some people die alone in houses like this. We're saving you from that." Something inside me changed. Not loud, not explosive, not the dramatic breaking point movies promised. Something colder, something more dangerous. The anger crystallized into focus, the despair compressed into determination. They expected me to crumble. They expected tears and accusations, and eventually defeated acceptance. They didn't know me as well as they thought. My phone buzzed. An email from the county clerk's office glowed on the screen. Automatic notification from a records request I'd filed weeks ago when something about this purchase had felt wrong. Subject line, "Occupancy transfer, irregular filing detected." I read it twice, then 3 times, making sure I understood every word. The filing Karen had used to justify their occupation hadn't been approved by the county. It had been submitted to the HOA's internal system, but never validated by any legal authority. She'd moved faster than proper process allowed, gambling that I wouldn't notice until the situation became normalized, until fighting back seemed more exhausting than surrender. I looked around my house, my walls, my floors, filled with people who thought the fight was already over, who assumed I would fold because I'd always been the quiet one, the accommodating one, the one who kept peace at any price. Karen caught my eye from across the room, smug, certain, already mentally spending whatever profit this scheme would generate. I smiled back at her for the first time that night, not because I was calm, not because I'd accepted anything, because I finally knew exactly where to strike. At 2 a.m, while the house slept, while my family dreamed in beds they'd stolen, I sat in my car in the driveway and filed requests for every HOA emergency filing from the past decade, every meeting minute, every financial disclosure, every amendment to bylaws that should have been public record. I also called a lawyer. By morning, another notice appeared on my door. Unauthorized occupants noted during overnight inspection. Immediate corrective action required. Compliance deadline, 48 hours. My cousin Trevor stood behind me on the porch, coffee mug steaming in his hand, completely relaxed like he was enjoying a vacation. He'd arrived sometime during the night, another reinforcement in the occupation of my home. "They're just posturing," he said, nodding toward the notice. "Standard HOA intimidation. This is basically a family place now. Karen said the paperwork will be finalized by Friday." I turned slowly, studying his face for signs of shame or hesitation, finding none. "You don't own this house. None of you do. I have the deed. I have the title. I have the receipt from the title company showing I paid in full." He smiled, condescending and confident. Not yet, but family is family. What's yours is ours. Isn't that what we were always taught? My phone buzzed with a calendar notification. Emergency HOA ownership review. Tomorrow. Attendance mandatory for all parties. The HOA meeting room occupied the basement of the community clubhouse, windowless and cold despite the summer heat outside. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Folding chairs faced a long table where Karen sat with 4 other board members, their faces arranged in expressions of bureaucratic concern. Karen sat at the center, fingers steepled, satisfaction radiating from every pore. She dressed formally for the occasion, blazer and pearls, like this was a courtroom instead of a community basement. "Thank you all for coming," she began, voice dripping with false graciousness. "We've received documentation that requires immediate board attention regarding the property at 214 Willowcrest Drive." She slid papers toward me across the table. I scanned them with mounting horror. Forged affidavits claiming I'd agreed to shared ownership. Altered occupancy applications listing my family members as co-claimants, financial documents suggesting I was unable to maintain the property alone, a statement supposedly signed by me requesting HOA intervention for family housing assistance. "You submitted these?" I asked, voice steady despite the shaking in my hands. Karen nodded toward the back of the room, where my family sat in a row like spectators at a sporting event. "Your relatives submitted them on your behalf. They're concerned about your financial stability, your mental health, your ability to manage a property of this size alone." Trevor stood against the wall, arms crossed, refusing to meet my eyes. My parents sat rigid in their chairs. Derek whispered something to Melissa that made her smile. "We're just protecting the community investment and protecting you from yourself. Homeownership is stressful. Family support is natural. The HOA is simply facilitating what everyone clearly wants." That night, my aunt called. Her voice carried practiced sympathy, the kind she used at funerals and interventions. "We're just protecting everyone," she said softly. "You were always bad with money. Remember that car you bought in college? Remember those credit cards? We're preventing you from making another mistake." I laughed, bitter and sharp enough to cut. I paid cash for this house, $260,000. No financing, no loans, no debt. Silence stretched across the line, long enough that I could hear her breathing change. "That's not what Derek said." Later, Trevor texted, "Don't fight this. It's embarrassing for everyone. We can split any profits when the market improves. You'll still get something." The truth finally crystallized, sharp and clear and devastating. They weren't guests overstaying their welcome. They weren't family members who'd misunderstood an invitation. They were coordinated. They were organized. They had a plan that predated my purchase by months, maybe years. And Karen was their instrument, their authority, their official stamp of legitimacy. I pulled the title deed from my safe, examining every line, every signature, every notary stamp. Something was wrong. A corner looked handled, a date seemed off, alterations existed in places I couldn't immediately identify but could somehow sense, like a song played in the wrong key. The county clerk confirmed my fears the next morning. A quitclaim deed had been filed, dated 2 days after the home washing, transferring my interest in the property to a family trust I'd never created. My name appeared on the document in handwriting that approximated mine. The signature wasn't close enough to fool anyone who looked carefully. The clerk's voice dropped to barely a whisper, aware of the gravity of what she was revealing. "This is fraud. This is criminal fraud. Whoever filed this committed multiple felonies." I felt anger settle into something colder than I'd ever experienced, something patient and calculating and utterly without mercy. Who witnessed the signature? She checked her records. Karen Whitlock. She certified it, notarized it, and hand-delivered it for expedited processing. And you processed it? It was flagged immediately. We've been waiting for someone to inquire. The filing was rejected, but whoever submitted it may not know that yet. As I left the county office, I spotted Karen's car parked across the street, engine running, her silhouette visible through tinted windows. She was watching, waiting, still confident that her scheme would survive scrutiny. I waved at her as I walked to my car. Her shadow didn't wave back. The HOA didn't wait for legal process. They operated on their own timeline, their own authority, their own interpretation of rules they'd written themselves. 2 days after my visit to the county clerk, private security appeared at my door. 3 men in uniforms that looked official but bore no government insignia. Behind them, my family stood in a semicircle, arms crossed in unified defiance, faces set in expressions of righteous certainty. Trevor held up a paper like a trophy hunter displaying a kill. "New owners," he announced. "The trust took possession this morning. You have 24 hours to vacate." I called the police, explained the situation, requested immediate assistance. Karen arrived before the officers did, already performing for the gathering crowd of neighbors who'd emerged to witness the spectacle. She positioned herself on my lawn like a general commanding troops. "This is a civil matter," she declared loudly enough for everyone to hear. "He's trespassing on community property. The HOA has assumed custodial responsibility until legal ownership is determined." The first officer arrived looking confused and cautious, clearly unprepared for whatever this situation actually was. Karen immediately approached him with documents, her voice shifting to helpful citizen mode. "We're just trying to prevent a disturbance. This young man is having some difficulties accepting his family's help. Mental health issues, we believe. The HOA is simply facilitating a peaceful transition." The officer looked at me with uncertainty. "Sir, do you have proof of ownership?" I handed him everything: the original title, the deed, the purchase agreement, the receipt from the title company, the bank statement showing the wire transfer, every document I'd retrieved from my safe and photocopied 4 times over. Karen's smile faltered for the first time. She hadn't expected documentation. She'd expected confusion and empty claims and eventual surrender. The officer studied the papers carefully, taking his time, comparing signatures and dates and official seals. Then he radioed dispatch, reading off the deed number slowly and clearly. The response came faster than anyone expected, crackling through his radio with the weight of authority. "Title is clean. Sole ownership confirmed. No valid transfer on record. A quitclaim deed was filed last week, but rejected as fraudulent. County recommends immediate investigation." Karen stiffened, her mask slipping for just a moment. "That's impossible. I personally verified." "You personally verified what exactly?" "I notarized the transfer documents. They were properly executed. The family trust was established according to—" "You notarized a document the rightful owner never signed?" The question hung in the air. My aunt stepped backward slowly. Trevor's face drained of color. The security guards exchanged uncertain glances, suddenly aware they might be accessories to something serious. Derek's confident expression crumbled into something that looked almost like fear. The officer's hand moved to his belt, not quite reaching for handcuffs, but making their presence known. "Forgery and conspiracy are felonies, not HOA matters." Karen's voice cracked for the first time since I'd met her. "Wait, there's been a misunderstanding. The family authorized—" "The family doesn't own the property," the officer interrupted, "which means the family can't authorize anything." Another cruiser pulled up, lights not flashing but presence unmistakable. A county fraud investigator stepped out, folder already in hand, expressions suggesting she'd been waiting for exactly this moment. The investigation moved faster than Karen had anticipated, faster than any of them had planned for. The files I'd requested under public record law arrived within a week, hundreds of pages documenting a pattern that stretched back years. The house at 214 Willow Crest Drive had been sold 4 times in 3 years before I bought it, always to outsiders, always to single buyers with savings and no local connections, always followed by disputes that forced sales at losses, always returned to HOA control through mechanisms buried in bylaws no one read. Karen didn't just take houses, she cycled them, collected fees during disputes, charged violations against confused owners, rented property short-term under HOA shell entities, pocketed profits through companies registered to her sister's name. An anonymous email led me to Mr. Rowan, the HOA vice president, a nervous man in his 60s who'd watched Karen's operation for years without finding the courage to stop it. We met in a grocery store parking lot at midnight, his car parked in shadows, his hands trembling as he passed me a flash drive through a cracked window. "She's been doing this for a decade," he whispered, glancing around like she might appear from darkness. "The board rubber stamps everything she wants. Anyone who questions her gets targeted next. Violations, fines, liens. I've seen families destroyed." I took the drive. "Why aren't you telling me this?" "Because you fought back. Because you didn't just leave. Everyone else left." He swallowed hard. "And because she's gotten worse. What she did to you, with your family, that's new. That's coordinated in ways I've never seen. She's evolving." The flash drive contained everything: emails discussing strategy, meeting minutes documenting illegal votes, revenue spreadsheets showing profit distribution, communications with my brother dating back 8 months, planning this takeover before I'd even found the house. One line in a March email made my blood freeze. House turnover profit projection, Q3. Target buyer identified. Family recruited. Timeline, 6 months from close to transfer. I was never meant to keep this house. I was selected, cultivated, and harvested like a crop. My family had been recruited as tools, promised shares of profit that Karen would ultimately control. Everyone played their role perfectly. Except, I didn't follow the script. Rowan's phone buzzed, loud in the quiet parking lot. He checked the screen, and his face went pale. "She's calling," he said. "I know she left the house. I have to go." He drove away without another word, leaving me alone with evidence that would end careers and possibly send people to prison. The HOA board didn't expect resistance at the emergency meeting I'd requested. They didn't expect a homeowner to arrive with lawyers, with documentation, with a county investigator sitting in the back row taking notes. They expected another victim shuffling towards surrender. Instead, they received certified letters from the county recorder, the district attorney, and the state real estate commission. The deed was legitimate, the title was clear, the purchase was valid, the quitclaim had been rejected as obvious fraud, no lien existed, no transfer had occurred, no shared ownership clause applied to a property purchased before the relevant bylaws were amended. What the HOA had done constituted criminal trespass, civil fraud, unlawful eviction, conspiracy to deprive a homeowner of property rights, and because they'd targeted someone based on manufactured family crisis, exploitation. The lawsuit wasn't civil, it wasn't a dispute between neighbors, it was a criminal referral backed by documentation that left no room for interpretation. Karen tried to argue intent, standing at the front of the room like she still held authority. "We believe the property was at risk. We believe the family's claims. We were trying to help." The county prosecutor, attending personally because the case had attracted attention, responded without emotion. "You attended the housewarming. You delivered documents to the owner personally. You notarized a forged signature you knew was forged because you watched someone else write it. You collected fees for a property you had no right to occupy. You coordinated with family members to manufacture a crisis that didn't exist." Silence swallowed the room. "This wasn't confusion," the prosecutor continued. "This was enterprise." The ruling came down 6 weeks later, after depositions and discovery and motions that Karen's attorney eventually stopped filing because there was nothing left to argue. permanent removal of Karen Whitlock from any HOA position, current or future, dissolution of the current board, restitution calculated at triple the amounts collected during the fraudulent occupation, criminal charges filed against Karen for fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and exploitation, criminal charges filed against my brother and Trevor for their participation, civil liability for all family members who'd knowingly participated in the scheme. The HOA was placed under state oversight indefinitely, managed by an appointed administrator until new elections could be held. Karen was escorted from the final hearing without speeches, without authority, without the power she'd wielded for years over people too exhausted or scared to fight back. She looked smaller than I remembered, diminished in ways that went beyond physical presence. Outside, neighbors who'd watched silently for weeks, who'd witnessed the notices and the security guards and the occupation, offered no defense for her. Some approached me afterward, quietly sharing their own stories, their own encounters with Karen's system, their own surrenders. One elderly man had lost his home of 30 years. A young couple had abandoned their down payment rather than fight. A widow had signed over property rights under pressure she couldn't withstand. I wasn't just fighting for my house. I was proving that fighting was possible. My family faced their own reckoning in separate proceedings. Derek and Melissa were named as co-conspirators, their financial communications with Karen revealing they'd expected to receive the house free and clear once I was driven out. Trevor faced forgery charges for his role in creating documents with my falsified signature. My parents, though not criminally charged, were named in civil suits for their knowing participation. The relationships couldn't survive what happened, not because I demanded cutting ties, but because trust, once destroyed this completely, doesn't regenerate through apologies. They'd looked at my success and seen something to take rather than celebrate. They'd chosen theft over family, scheme over support. Some wounds don't heal. Some betrayals simply end things. Weeks later, the house was quiet again. Fresh locks secured every door. Clean walls bore no trace of occupation. The marks and scuffs painted over. The energy of invasion slowly fading. No HOA banners flew from the porch. No notices appeared on the door. No heels clicked on midnight patrols. I walked through every room, reclaiming spaces that had been stolen and returned, touching walls that had witnessed everything. The guest bedroom where Melissa had measured for furniture, the kitchen where Derek had laughed with Karen, the porch where I'd found notice after notice documenting my supposed failures. All of it was mine again, not just legally, but actually, truly, finally. My parents came once, months after the legal proceedings ended. They stood awkwardly in the living room they'd helped try to steal, older than I remembered, diminished by what they'd participated in. An apology was offered, lengthy, tearful, full of explanations about financial pressure and Derek's persuasion and Karen's assurances that I would ultimately agree. I accepted it because holding anger forever would only poison me, would only let them continue stealing things through my own bitterness. But I didn't forget. Some trust, once broken, never fully heals. Some family bonds, once severed, remain scar tissue rather than connection. They left after an hour, and I didn't invite them back. That evening, I sat alone on the porch, watching stars emerge above the neighborhood. The same stars that had witnessed my arrival, my displacement, my fight, my victory. Crickets sang in grass I'd planted myself. Wind moved through trees that would shade this property for decades after everyone involved was gone. The dream house still stood, but now it meant something more than shelter or investment or proof of financial discipline. It meant that ownership isn't just paperwork filed in county offices. It's willingness to fight when fighting seems impossible. It's knowing that authority without law eventually collapses under its own illegitimacy. It's understanding that predators expect surrender, and resistance is the one thing they never adequately plan for. Karen had cycled houses for years. She'd built systems and recruited families and manufactured crises. She'd operated in darkness, counting on exhaustion and confusion and the fundamental decency of people who couldn't imagine such coordinated betrayal. She hadn't counted on someone who'd grown up with nothing, who'd learned that nothing given could be trusted, who understood that everything worth having had to be defended. The HOA clubhouse lights stayed dark across the street, the building quiet and empty, waiting for new leadership that would take months to establish. No one walked patrols, no one filed notices, no one enforced rules designed to steal rather than protect. The house stayed mine. And for the first time since I'd stood in that doorway with keys warm in my palm, I slept peacefully in my own bed, in my own room, in a home that no one would ever take from me again. The morning light through my bedroom window felt different than it had before. Cleaner, clearer, earned in ways that purchase alone could never accomplish. I made coffee in my kitchen, ate breakfast at my table, walked my floors in bare feet, feeling every inch of the home I'd fought to keep. Outside, the neighborhood continued as it always had, families leaving for work and school, dogs walking their owners down familiar sidewalks, life proceeding as though nothing extraordinary had happened in the house at 214 Willow Crest Drive. But something had happened. Something that would echo through HOA meetings and real estate transactions and family gatherings for years to come. One person had refused to surrender. One person had proven that the system only worked when victims cooperated with their own destruction. One person had demonstrated that ownership, real ownership, the kind that survives betrayal and conspiracy and coordinated theft, requires more than signatures on documents. It requires someone willing to say no and mean it, and fight until no means something. The house stood quiet around me, filled with morning light and possibility, and the absolute certainty that I would never again be the person who trusted without verification, who signed without reading, who believed that family meant safety. I had learned expensive lessons, but I had learned them in a house I still owned, in a life I still controlled, in a future I would build on foundations no one could shake. The keys sat on my nightstand where I'd placed them the night everything began. I picked them up, felt their weight, remembered the warmth of that first moment in the doorway. They were still mine. Everything was still mine. And nothing would ever change that again.